Hello, everybody. I'll give you another minute or 5 seconds to arrive. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got a terrific reading for you, put together by Tysh, who's going to be joined by Laura Moriarty, Ted Pearson, and Isaac Pickell. And I'm going to introduce Chris in just a moment. Excuse me, my name's Anselm Berrigan. I'm the poetry editor for the Brooklyn Rail and host of this show on Wednesdays, the Wednesday afternoon Tropical Poetry series. And glad to have you all here today. If you are coming in for the first time, you might keep an eye on the chat while the reading is going on. There'll be links to bios and various works by our esteemed readers, as well as some information about the rail itself. This is part of the new social environment series, which is up to, I think, 7,000 episodes. And this is the 99th poetry reading, and then we'll reset back to 0 and start counting up again next week. Very happy to have Chris Tysh curating the reading. Chris is going to say a few words by way of introduction of the reading itself, and then come back to read near the end. Chris Tysh's latest publications are Hotel des Archives, a trilogy from Station Hill Press, and Derrida's In/Voice from Blaze Vox, which came out in 2020. She holds fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Kresge Foundation, as well as a Murray Jackson Creative Scholar in the Arts Award from Wayne State University, where she teaches writing, and she is the poetry editor of Threefold, an independent arts quarterly. Please welcome Chris Tysh.
Hi. To say that writing is a social practice is to illuminate its relational aspect, what the French philosophers such as Jacques Rancière or Nicolas Bourriaud call relational aesthetics. Art is a state of encounter, a space for exchange, dialogue, community, interface, although when we are confined within our solitudes, especially the last 3 years, we tend to forget that bridge to the other. Brooklyn's Rail's readings remind us why the interhuman matters. I am beyond thrilled to feature writers whom we publish in Threefold, an online journal based in Detroit. Ted Pearson, who writes quicker than you can read, author of 30+ books, always puts melopoeia at the heart of his lines. A quote from Last Date, published by Singing Horse Press, 2020. And what could be more beloved than the loss that brings forth song? Laura Moriarty's Personal Volcano, which is a publication put out by Nightboat in 2019, rewrites the Poundian dance of the intellect towards a new radicalized intelligibility, which makes its own specific sound, whether it be a racket or chant. I quote, blood in our veins, totally alive inside our pink hearts, our skies. If a number of postmodern texts Fisher old models of self-expression, Isaac Pickell, a young Detroit poet and scholar, embeds meta and referentiality with nonchalant charm. I quote, we deserve more elegant metaphors and rude little arson boys. This is from a section of poems published in the summer issue of Threefold. And unfortunately, Michelle Naka-Pierce could not join us today because of a family emergency, but I'd like to read the quote I had reserved for her from a Continuous Freeze Bordering Red, which is Fordham University Press 212. Michelle Naka-Pierce's migratory lyrics speak to the crossing of bodies and borders, quote, to sketch a shelter out of fragments, quote, you feel for the wound and the invisible grief, the indistinct edges of sorrow and sadness. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Our first reader will be Ted Pearson. Ted began writing poetry in 1964. He subsequently attended Vandercook College of Music, Foothill College, and SF State. In 1976, he published his first book, The Grit, and began his long association with language poetry. He has since published 27 books of poetry, including Extant Glyphs, 1964 to 1980, and An Intermittent Music, 1975 to 2010. His latest book published this year is Durations, and he lives in Northampton, Massachusetts. Please welcome Ted Pearson to the rail.
Thanks, Enzo. And thanks very much to Chris for inviting me to read. Much appreciated. Happy to be here. This afternoon, I thought I'd share excerpts from one of the three series that make up my latest book, Durations. So I'm going to excerpt from the second part of that book, a selection of tiny vignettes called screenshots. And there's an epigraph from Richard Diebenkorn. I can never accomplish what I want, only what I would have wanted had I thought of it beforehand. Weak sunlight at high noon filtered through the smoke of hellfire. It was a muggy day in late August. Tongues of flame leapt from broken windows. The old regime was coming apart. Even as they hoped to take us with them, we have thus far evaded death by attrition. Experience has taught us what little we know. It's hard to imagine the world at peace, a fact as painful as our own mortality. It's amazing how fragile these structures are, how so few could bring so many to ruin. What follows is based on doctrinal confusion. We say that in dreams begin recriminations, that thought resumes in the darkest hour. We balk at memories of early childhood when how we lived before life happened was how we thought life was supposed to be. Only those who have seen the wind may invite the gong to sound. It's a matter of submission, not of will, when your task is to foreground the message. The perceptions that wake it, the affects that shape it, and the music of thought when we think. And though its voicings may catch the ear, writings more formal than a field would be. Call it a dance between hand and eye. This reflects the history of writing and the evolution of type. I see the words that letters form as figures that begin with the hands that formed them. And the form that follows is poetry. From prehistory's mysteries to the fleeting present, it gamely shelters those minims of data that spell our epical discontent. Thus does it tarry despite its travails in the fecund womb of absurdity. Your story begins as the old world ends, leaving only you and a handful of friends. Much like the unsung singer and her song, empty promises have strung you along. But not to worry, your day will come, trailing clouds and so forth. We hold these verses to be self-evident, that trauma short-circuits the grammar of thought, that songs are antidotes to what was lost when history went unheard, that too many act against their self-interest, that too few stand by their words, that every culture is an edifice of layers, not least you yourself, that anarchy of the intellect leads to entropy of the will, that meaning issues from the empire of signs, and that your story, though rife with digressions, leaves still time to parse your lines. What were we thinking when the lights went out in the houses we once lived in? Not that there ever was a we, but for two alone together. Friends observed a disaster in the making as affection foundered on the shoals of intimacy. By what analogy does love survive? What mode of thinking does loss engender? I suppose it's down to what one recalls, that lives were shared and houses. Other memories followed suit, touching tableau of romantic dinners and fervent late-night vows. But if vows were exchanged, I forget what was said. Proximity leads to enforced boundaries. That's when you know the spark is dead. The city, in principle, belongs to no one. Yet these were the streets we walked along, and we thought of them as ours. Pictures efface the walls that absorb them, and that's precisely how custodial facts become curatorial nightmares. The challenges of transport made it difficult indeed to liberate these frescoes, around which models draped themselves on the opening night of the show. Their faces were beacons of cosmetic art, de facto adverts for gilded cages, the rarest of birds they never alight except for photo ops, nor do they easily break a sweat. Much like those enfrescoed nymphs, they are fantasies which, if tempting, only mock reality. This leads to the questions you wanted to ask, the one where you wonder if goods and services are worth the wear and tear, and the one where you wonder whether without walls there would even be any pictures or models to linger there. Before, there was nothing. Now, there's most distrust in others is what's missing in ourselves. I'm far less certain I'll get this right than I am they'll get it wrong. And who are they but you, dear reader? The numbers say we are not alone. You can check yourself in the mirror. And though I was never fond of footnotes, in your case, I'll make an exception. You have studied the bitmap where our memories dwell, and you've sought the improbable in all good things. You can still recall when peace broke out, though that didn't last for long. But we give weight to the evidence, even though it's thin. If it happened even once before, peace could reign again. Such is our hope for those to come, but who knows where or when. For the youngest among us, these may seem to be missives from a bygone world, a humdrum world, less pressed by catastrophe, less hemmed round by disaster. Or what would be worse, a world that viewed our most violent proclivities as normal, which, be it said, to our regret, they are. There's nothing short of the horizon to arrest a gaze that carries beyond these walls, a gaze that longs for the unhurried days that our faith and posterity promised, a steadfast gaze that looks to the future from its perch in the dwindling present, when the breaking point between opposing forces is the point of no return, where there are no doors, there are no locks, so we have no use for keys, nor for the myth of some bygone world where poets took their ease. I'm being asked to check my audio devices, which I will.
Now you sound good.
Thank you.
We just can't see you. But that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine actually. Thank you. All right. The fates divided the book of outcomes into parts like Caesar's Gaul. News of war receded in the weeks before the coup. The mistress of the book had been terribly lonely, but our separate season had come and gone. April in Paris explained everything and paved the way for a summer romance which led to autumn in New York. The poet, meanwhile, brought to light what long was hidden from our view, which made us wonder how he knew where to look and when he knew what he knew. I should be back. Even as life is an open question, it's a challenge living without answers in sight. The invisible world has left no signs. Its counterpart yearns to be free. But the thought police tell us to keep on moving. There's nothing here to see. In those years, life began after dark. First we partied till break of day, then we slept till the sun went away. At worst the externals, clouds and rain, were the stuff of dreams. Our inner weather called the tune. The world was our digression, but it wasn't simply a case of extremes. There's a vast middle ground to be covered, a world of towns where time's been reversed, where dreams of oblivion come and go, and life's more a matter of ebbs than flows. The Oracle brought out early footage of a future that doesn't include you. Strands of meaning drifted past your once and future purview. After siesta, the sun sang the hours, and then it was twilight again. And that's when you woke and became the one best known as you to your friends. Not to presume upon the interest of others, but one did want to join the conversation, not to be dismissed. Even as dimensions traverse each other, silence traverses the names it elides, much as love's labyrinthine ear delights in the phrases it needs to hear. The unspoken truth grows clearer by day. There never was all that much to say. Old powers yield to new constraints. The demon of analogy is now a saint. We've had enough of plotters and schemers, best to take up with makers and dreamers. They love their work, so save your praise for the ones who bring comfort to your latter days. It wasn't by chance we smashed the plates that proclaimed the law of the Father. It's the only law we ever knew, but it wasn't worth the bother. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Thanks for joining us, being with us today. Next, we're going to hear from Laura Moriarty. Born in St. Paul, Minnesota, Laura grew up in Cape Cod and Northern California, where she's lived since 1964. She was the director of the American Poetry Archives at the San Francisco State University Poetry Center for many years and has taught at Naropa University and Mills College. She was also deputy director of small press distribution for 2 decades. Her recent books include Personal Volcano, Who That Divines, A Tonalist, and a Semblance, selected in New Poems 1975 to 2007. Last February, she had her first show of visual art, Wrapped Glass, at the Right Window in San Francisco. Please welcome Laura Moriarty.
Thanks, Anselm, and thanks to Chris and Carolyn, also for Christopher inviting me in, for Carolyn for doing all that emailing, and thanks to the Rail. I'm going to be reading from Witch Walks, which is a manuscript that I've completed recently. This is how it's spelled, and this is an image that I made, and Witch Walks, which is called Witch Walks, Loves Mind is the subtitle, and it includes the Witch Walks from 0 to 45. It's about walking, and it's about the world in which one walks, which is currently one of catastrophe and violence, and COVID, of course. And it's about aging, and particularly aging as a woman, and also a strange new visual practice that's now about a year old that I've been doing for a while. That's why I set up down here in our very old garage. You can kind of observe a few of my experiments behind you, or actually behind me. I'm going to do a really quick run through of the table of contents. I hope it'll take about a minute, because it'll give you a sense of the whole book, I think. Witch Walk 0, I won't read all the Witch Walks. Reassemblance, For the Alices, Witch Who, First Love First, Title Role, The Made Real, Problem of Reversible Time, What and Who, The Old Return, Look-See Time, Sound Effect, First Rain, Alternate, A Light, Divinatory Design of Birds and Earth, Recollection, No Future, But What is Steel, Oh Fair Planet, Attached, Wrapped Glass, I Walk of Ancient Felt Flowers That Collecting, Fiercely Transpiring, The Wild Corollaries, More on Fate, This Bliss, This Peace, Complete with, Which as Love is, How to Fly, Varieties of Which Contortionists Gone Because Which Cruise, With Which What It Takes, Permanent Wave, Back into Love, Robe Chant, Imagining, Follow the Work, The Air, No Clean Breaks, Blended Pleasure, Articulated Lair, Heart Left Alive. Witch Walk 5. Old woman, your eye searches the field like a scythe. Robert Duncan, The Structure of Rhyme, 6. Like a sigh, permitted or not, these visits to Mira Vista, field, fair farm, or look-see place, which with walking later renounces renunciation, the better to incantate as phrase after praise betrays the visible day to the visible night, today singing, what can you say, moment by movement, or see, worried, wise, amazed, herded, heralded, crazed by this old epithet, rule, and designation of hags, for which read old women whose presence absent to some, purely physical to others, despite being where and what they are required to be, go, say, and know, noting how dreamed of mental meeting protocols in the form of songs and knowledge, combine the known with the read, said, intoned, and suggested, along with the berries there, also read, thorns with which to be bled, leave one stepping out attired with gown, crown, and scythe, clearing what has died into what is born by the poem of the mind, including words not me but mine, while I, menaced by remembered threats, summon my ways and those of my actual mother, Maybelle Reynolds, to push in and back out while hatted, masked, cloaked, fraught, being with her, withered, wrought, where belief, relief, knowing, and going are brought along with these steps, at the feet of which lay we, reconfigured into us who write what is read, said, and displayed, resolving the made place into the made real day. In this Witch Walk 21, I'm investigating my Irish heritage, which has never meant that much to me, but now I went to Ireland and had it. Witch Walk 21 of Ancient Wild Witches, William Butler Yeats, whose ritual with skill, information, and liminal linking of water, trees, and weedy wisdom faced with head emphasis as the head for the person, or for death's descending attention to place, speech, seasons, songs, lakes, or locks from which appear massive cornices, trumpet-like with lotus pattern from Egypt via Eastern Europe, more a style than a plan, an attitude than an articulated mode, though found with battle gilded crown, cauldron, cup, axe, charm, coin, held, form, should tell of horned persons fought, patterns deployed of knots, bowls, pots, swords, and torques with ravens, owls, and bulls, hoarded, then thrown into bodies of water, known barely to contain deities whose deeds, pictured as gifts and tricks, are ones whose agendas interact in medley form, sung to be strung out along roads and coasts, becoming fast, sad pieces with which to stand, see, and stomp in place where fate-footed ghosts, featured in controlled forays of wild competition, ridden, fiddled, riddled with oaths, sworn in air squeezed from devices that seem to breathe on their own. As rivers flow into rivers, improvised spells are recast as blessings, quickened with friends and endless kin in the midst of lives and deaths carved into still standing megaliths, lit tonight while time fits into the promised recognition and threat of pre-owned gestures whose best repetition, handheld, unwritten pretense of honeyed metal fits exactly into the predicted existence as a flowering circle made of stone fully by our devices known, emerges as home. So witches walk, but they also, as it's well known, fly. And so there are pieces in here that are in relation to flying, which I often dream and fantasize about, probably because I live in the hills, which are very precipitous. So the danger of flying is always there. Witch Walk 31, varieties of which, oh, that I could fly, William James. As charms of finches, diaries of doves and other avians hover, humming down into hunger, delight, and desire, having gone as oneself around, finding who or what holds the breast, pressed by feral prayer into folds of the heart's feathered weather's beating declaration of being free and aware of the heft of iridescence in the very air, followed by day's wary insight into staying high while abiding, being equivalent to not dying, which is in turn and time, the same as flying. Witch Walk 36 is among the pieces in this collection that are related to the Grail, which I developed an unexpected re-interest in, having kind of given that up back in the 70s, but then it came back and it seemed very vexed, the Grail. Too much purity, too much weird Christian masculinist purity and obsession, and the obsession of folks on the right with that kind of mysticism is something that one is also aware of, thinking of it. And even in the Spicer circle, the politics of some of the people that we admire doesn't bear regarding, I have to say. And I'll say three other funny things about this is, well, not funny there, is Aerosmith. There's an Aerosmith connection with a old song. And Claire Falkenstein is an artist who used to work in metal and glass. And I believe Jamie Robles mentioned that on Facebook, and I immediately got a book of her, and she's amazing. Witch Walk 36, What It Takes. I was a witch, Lance, Jack Spicer, the Holy Grail. Claiming this chance chalice, offering the cup left-handedly to catch the essence of domestic craft, self-taught, self-contained, self-defined and defended, as if the Grail, as embodied thought, was weights, cards, clouds, crossed curse on Spicer's book's lover, as yet another damsel is offered, brash as she was clear, Claire Falkenstein, loud, proud, consistently laid out what was there to be laid, including the permanent wave of a fabulous fountain now removed, shaped by the usual transubstantiation of money to blood, to wine and back, clear as glass, drunk with disenchantment's requisite capture of a goal achieved or climax allowed among us whose self-same quest zest sought action's containment, an infusion of facts lasting into blood-drenched factions of resistance and shows of force as people of the cup collapsed into being caught in the same place at the same time as monsters, undermining the belief in daily survival in what it turns out is not a safe ground from which to flee or fly, because what is ending is sending to find this life or that story seems to abide, but does not, making it impossible to swallow what was wine then, but is not now. And this the crux, that the nothing between us is what it took, what it takes, walking away to know, to let it go. And I'm going to close with the last piece in the book, Witch Walk 45, which is a kind of homage. There's a number of homages in the book to various artists and visual, musical, literary. And this one is in relation to Tysh Sori, and who's described always as a multi-instrumentalist of tremendous success, I have to say, but it's just someone I listen to really a lot. Heart left alive, only one sky, Tyson Sori, Koan. In post-Grail time, adorned by form, which overcomes an overarmed nation's agenda of violent past and future crimes, of capture, trespass, fear, attack, crusade, dismissal, and assassination, framed as gain, while what remains are piles of grails drifting, grail upon grail, as not existing but persistent objects, unconnected to longed for correct truth, which crossed descends into mounds of bloody children and only too imaginable danger, despair and preoccupation, heady with its heated, bleak metal of malleable mind to be aimed at the strange gains of ill-gotten powers, pure prevarications, rapacious waves of false and desperate reliefs or slaughter, with its heads on plates and places inundated with wasted lives, shaped into lies of winners, losers, victims, and systems. Not an event, but a situation, gunned down, ribbon driven, as when grail as face or flower is erased by time, or when errors of transcription conflate the wrong lines, right angles, fallen angel into the fairy witch continuum of women tending their crafted cauldron, filled with split heads, old newts, balls and bones, whose gridded grottos grief belief desacralized into false castles of more lies is fastened with wire clamped to the battery of any fly-by-night heart left alive, whose graillessness reconfigured into a platter or dish is the host's host of loaded issues bound to hold up and on as this resistance puts itself into this old one or that youth whose fear is the forest of I am not Guinevere, but was then, whose lady of the lake I hate you claim, made when we saw through time together, was surrounded by ramparts of thought, constructed by the same perpetrators, true to their fake tales of grailish adventures from which awakening we remain alert, alive, unfailingly resilient and resistant beneath our one and only sky. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Next, we're going to hear from Isaac Pickell, who's a PhD candidate in Detroit, where he writes and teaches the borderlands of Black literature. He's the author of Everything Saved Will Be Last from Black Lawrence Press in 2021. And It's Not Over Once You Figure It Out, forthcoming from Black Ocean in 2023. Isaac's taken a seat in all 50 states and has much to look forward to. Please welcome Isaac to the rail.
Thank you, Anselm, and thank you, Chris, for putting this together, and Brooklyn Rail for hosting. I'm very glad to still be described as a young poet, so I'm going to stick with that for as long as I can. Today I'm reading a series of poems, some of which are in my forthcoming book, but most of which are just written in the last couple of months, which is, I guess, what I'm thinking about right now. So thanks for having me. Every person I imagine becomes fabric, not of the community or of time. The little movie in my head has lost touch with connotative imagery. I mean, they are transformed into textile, like muslin or tulle or sturdy polyester or the kind of nylon blend that bends and then also breaks eventually. It's been weeks of this, flattening goosebump and vessel and pulse into thread, because it's hard to commiserate with carpet squares. Sometimes I still talk to myself about mourning the intimacy of some cheap swatch I never really cared for, and what happens when you start wearing your acquaintances. I mean that we already are, and their silences carry a staggering honesty stretched across our dilated skin. I have been careful to avoid visualizing strangers so they at least can stay real. There's no good reason to choose curiosity over catharsis or listen for what no one is saying. But for the first time, every story from every corner is accessible. It takes just a few clicks to fill our closet with an unending wail of joy borrowed from some other string's sorrow shout, borrowed from some other string's wail of joy, borrowed from an endless economy of utilitarian bargains. And remember that Tuvalu is still disappearing into the ocean, and think again about the cost of hand-spun silk, how it feels for itself alone, whether or not you can afford it. This one really is a question. How do you smile for anything that has a price? Straits, after Muriel Rukeyser. The feeling settled in from sternum to gut back when they loved things just 'cause. An ocean's patient violence makes islands from bridges. From a deafening calm comes a crumbling wreck. What's left of our oldest strands, connective tissue, cluttered sand if we're lucky, and glass if we're found to be useful. The sea is patient, like it needs nothing to be midnight for marker or synecdoche, like the break can't make its own. Inviolable. The earth is a black and living thing, Lucille Clifton. I saw a doe in a snowed-in field. I thought it should be happy, but she was beautiful, as so many sad things are. Our whole story's been this heartbreaking ripoff. A billion species we never bothered to hear from, named breaths believing that they were words. Later on, I passed a fresh deer at rest on the side of the road, but the narrator refused to speculate whether or not they were the same creature. Should we call our dreams fantasy, our plans dreams, or why bother naming them at all? To be the shameless crows. My body will not cave to the politics of how it moves. Pear, bare flower, short on dreams of big, luscious, faraway places that already feel like home. Just below the ubiquity of secret fear, below the next fucking coals. My body opens not doors. People living in Antarctica develop the accent of seclusion, uncovering something we thought was buried under the light work the wheel made from our hips and shoulder blades. As difference decays into memorial text, as change filters through eulogy, people move to Antarctica and forget the sound of red-faced men and forget to witness anger to make their own, where anger is deaf if it's never been heard. I am sorry, Michigan. I don't remember shaking hands with you. If only I could figure how to say everything outside is outside my control and mean it more than a moment. Before we decay into memorial text, we are filtered into eulogy, sumptuous clutter spun up in our own stories and the dirt that made us. Some words are too big for words. God knows we birds cannot help but sing, vining into language nests and stretching out tendrils greased in puzzlement that one poem can't answer what anything is about. The shrunken globe robs us of an ending waiting with a bow, leaving us to know entirely too much to know anything at all, so we touch bodies like open sores, tender and toying with the idea of rot, but careful, a poke, a gauze, narration riven from the memory that language is nothing, just a gesture of empire outsourcing its Midas touch. We're left to bellow at you, open throats like a flu. It's been the end of the world for someone all along. Okay, this is the one I'll introduce. The following poem aims to elegize two irrecuperable pioneers of dehumanization, executed murderer Joseph Paul Jernigan, whose body was sliced into 1,871 pieces as part of the Visible Human Project, and the piece, as you'll see, by Kenneth Goldsmith, which did much the same to the memory of Michael Brown. Uncommissioned elegy for Joseph Paul Jernigan and the body of Michael Brown. The first digital corpse traded pain for posterity, taking poison, rejecting its rightful chair, but the audience applause. Audience forever inside your drive, he is saved. He dies for endless dissection, consonant with the expectation we are allowed to linger on the skin of a criminal. Repeating hierarchies of the global organ, the first visible man relives his American dream on knees bending every way. Plastic collapse, all ribs and earlobes, every piece of your body which keeps growing even after you fall into bare bones horizon, reseeding into digital morgues, renaming the mortuary a science, a clinical gaze, determining who is human by the coordinates for who was, plotted with rulers, clamps, and forceps splayed onto touch screens. The body is now swiped through. Now you can refresh us, refresh, update until we are cross-section, millimeter by millimeter, softened enough as slivers of data until we are made to matter, reassorted into the new archive. Those photographs were never really surgeons. Once freeze-framed and still life, close up and invisible, projecting us as larvae, fat and full on promised knowledge, category our new chrysalis. Like the butterflies bloom, not knowing they used to be goo, still holding on to memory, wormy smells of fear and hope and safety. Now we are freed, unpeeling crispy layers off binary wings, promises to disseminate as truth over myth, even in death. And so what if we lose our fleshy interior, separate from muscle, untether from every embedded response, metamorphing all our skin cells in a flash, excluded life exposed at last as a toolbox. The corpse of the future sees everyone resting in digital desk drawers, writing new obituaries each day as another cover for autopsy in the background, awaiting our so-called moment of death. How quickly can you erase the body under the sheets where it finally rested? Yours is not the first corpse to be. Come glamour, dazzle with your soft pink matter. Look, no one said butterflies could. No butterfly ever asked to be. Metaphor for flowering thought. Look here. No one really tells the butterflies themselves shit. We all hear prophecy from the canopy, where life refuses its flatness, forgetting it has nothing to do with sound, no job, no instructional manual, just a siren, softer than a whisper's to remain. And then someone said, the death of a scream. And then someone said, weeping in the tangerine glow of the check engine light. And then someone, of the spring sky, almost distressingly bright and blue beneath still stark brown barren trees, said, still expecting a backdrop that's raw and gray. The same sky listens for the end of rainbow, that demoralizing specificity, like the closet. The attic is no solitary act. And then someone asks, where is this felt within the material conditions which constitute what we make and take and lose, like home? Where does this land against the body descended from crowns to crows? And if the whole is dark enough, any squiggle can call itself a flower. Grandmother's farm and other good investments. When I was young, I could still remember a future. Deborah Green. We were born to the land to work the land. I have discovered overgrowth from my own bedroom window, the complex that's rent controlled just over the tops of family homes and their income ceilings. Despite our demands, most roofs can't be raised, and you are not allowed to feel sad about this. Some things are bad for you, but good for prevention as a policy against your government shutdown, if not your utility shut off. Everyone is eventually shut out of somewhere. Even deep, dark holes echo overdue hopes, waiting to flicker out with some ancient reprisal. Some words live forever on the lips of the past, abiding its endlessness and only appearing to be trapped, like distant light takes just as much time as it takes to reach you. Just like stars, reparation reaches you where money can no longer buy happiness, under the dirt where you learned what fingernails were for, where you learned what grows from nothing. Dirt teaching only that time keeps anything forever, even the dirt you were promised. 300 acres after inflation, sold at auction to traders with good interest rates, promising only the finest families your home. None of the odd, none of the old, only the good bones. Concrete and acres of matching shingles, leaving you dirt compressed by the structures to make your own air so writhe, where all worms here are soon to be out from one. For now, there's no telling how much your pain is worth. Thank you, everyone. I have one more poem. I'll read it, and then I'm looking forward to hearing from Chris. Even I who was there, I don't believe. For all the muscles in my mouth, from all the answers to everything to the mute earth, can you really say people care what people have been through? Of course, we are all dying all over again, rolled under the same asteroid in different frames, affected hell, synthetic hell, hollow hell, prefab hells. Our garbage can is now on fire, and Rude little arson boys curl their striated fingers from this mess of peat to pretend wealth's wreckage might bloom. To germinate in the ersatz soot as ferns say, some secrets are decades gone and still they call us secrets. Say, no one is supposed to know the answer to everything. Say, our lungs refuse any other name. Say, any other name. Happy people hide like deaths under paper mache, like people are plastic wrapped, pre-packaged, trimmed and clean roots of their righteousness, bright and beautiful and sold on screen. They'll say, the color of your palm, just like the pale underside of leaves that fall at the end of summer. Some remained real, confident that privilege would see them through, and it shows your life only has to make sense to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac. And to cap things off, please welcome back Chris Tish.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail. I'd like to read from my latest book, which is Derrida's Invoice, which was published during the pandemic, so not too many people saw it. And I'm going to read a short selection. So I'm using lines from the postcard, which is Jacques Derrida's 1980s work, From Socrates to Freud and Beyond. And just the titles are the quotations from the text. And then I sort of jump off. Without borrowing, nothing happens. Darkness mirrors a sense of malaise, where rubber meets road, a doorway to what comes next. Au revoir, les enfants. Chance will never abolish Coup de Torchon, directed Bertrand Tavernier, 1981, on the eve of WW2 in the forsaken colonial town of French West Africa. Eddie Mitchell, a bad boy of French rock and roll, plays Nono, a moronic, lubriciously about dressed in a marinière and cotton pedal pushers, tricolore, bougnoule, need I say more? Fuck the empire and its muddy rivers. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. Frédéric Jeffsky, piano composition, 1975. In a letter from Black Mountain College, April 22, 1957, John Wieners writes to Schuyler, dearest Jimmy, bring an excitement form-wise, not just word-wide excitement, but the twist of the hip. This way, before Frank O'Hara's tight pants poetics throw shade on noun and verbs, cheat sheets taped to the top of my skirt. Tomorrow, I'll write to you again in our foreign tongue. The thread that ties this text lies in the scattered fragments I carry in the bowl of my dress, like stolen coal, thin ice on railroad tracks. From the outset, the relational shifters of discourse, pronouns in particular, the orphan IU structure, hold the récit in place, the way she's taught to pinch the seam on a whole grain loaf, while I, perd le fil, lose track of the film, I mean dream, so resplendent just a minute ago behind my eyelids, awakened by the early bird caucus. I harbor an intense sensation au creux de l'estomac, une sueur froide unbuttons my shirt, still wet, lampe de chevet qui s'allume au toucher, siphons the perpetual flow of images, ebbing now across the lit up room. The architect of Rambo strips, bande sonore, goes out the door tout doucement. Lost in translation, director Sofia Coppola, 2003, tips the soundtrack towards silence. Scarlett's pink undies notwithstanding, mouthing sweet things in the Tokyo bar. Sayonara, motherfucker. I've become your wife. During the Prague spring, a month after Russian tanks roll into the city, cut across 3 signs, painted over, causing the convoys to rumble east and west and back again, lost monkey wrench up their ass, cobblestones uneven ground at dawn, the virtuosity of rebellion, music to our ears, piano, alto sax, bass, and drums. A girl just married in a thin madras dress stands on Portobello Road, fingering dark velvet, silk, and linen, vintage threads placed like a fan of days past. Cigarette à la main, the stranger flicks a fag end at thigh level, now in flames, syncope, stanza break. In the general collapse of senses, autrement dit, synesthesia, one needs to heed the code, mood and structure, verbal arrangement between words and world. The presence of the body in each versograph alerts the reader to piecemeal subjectivity, la femme en morceaux. Other slogans will follow. Sometimes I wish all was illegible to them. I always say that this cracks me up because Derrida is quite illegible. But I'm such a philo groupie. Nothing so strange as Adho Svanasana, downward facing dog, illegible. These vast American cities, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Detroit, ragged, crumbling piers abandoned like Moses in the bulrushes of the Nile. True that, as per the wire, David Simon's clip parlance. In the scribbled chords of the theme song, something ruined, occluded, not meant to be brought back from the dead, tongues falling away andante behind a steep bluff. A narrative emerges, a premise, a promise, in spite of the text's effort to front its own unreadability. What eludes the human sensorium, or perhaps ça crève les yeux, depending on your standpoint, is the foolishness of being right, more foreign than the thin handwriting on the back of an old photograph to a groovy chick. Only groove I find in a pocket dictionary means furrow, rut, or trench. This whole va-et-vient, to and from movement of discourse poofs up my checkered skirt as I step on the metro grate. And if there is time, I'd like to read just a few poems from a new series on cinema, on movies, mostly directed by women, but there's some male directors as well. It does not have a title yet. So this is a movie based on, I don't know if you know this movie, it's called High Art. It's from 1998 and was directed by Lisa Holodenko with Ali Sheedy. High Art. It wouldn't do to describe Greta's deathly pallor as she snorts some age, not the wasted hangers-on who fill the frame in a boho chic kind of way. It's Lucy's white tank that summons our eyes. Suddenly every muscle shapes the moment her lips crash against the pearly bark of their bed. Again and again, we peer over the lip of the crater and plunge our hands into what remains of the contact sheet to be blown up later. Its queer title, Maroon of Center, Little Chain of Junkies Found Dead to the World. And two more. This one you might know, it's called Winter's Bone. It's a movie from 2010 directed by Deborah Granick with Jennifer Lawrence, who's very, very young in it. Knowing the names for backland folks adds little to what can be said about this quest narrative where breath gives way to a wintry scene. Young Grease strings wash on the line, grabbing clothespins from little sister's hand, a bucolic tableau that would belie ramshackle cars and septic tanks as if lawn ornaments. That everyone cooks methamphetamine is just a fact, like number of inhabitants or altitude rather than exposed ribs on a safety net atop a burnt out lab. Like Beauty's father who loses her to the beast in a game of cards, Jessup Dolly puts up Reese home in a collateral for bail bond. The endlessness of women's war takes shape then as now, as if the camera held in tight focus the same shot, the actress simply stepping into a new plot. Bluegrass banjo raises a fire plume toward the darkened sky. And last one. This is a movie by Pedro Almodovar from 1999, all about my mother. I just saw it a couple of days ago and wrote this. An intravenous drip opens to a liminal space, neither here nor there, death antechamber or a tunnel, racing toward light, a kind of fluid intersection where grieving mothers, non and sex workers spell the question, this desire to come loose of all markers, a tornado warning about glass doors, beneath which Almodovar in pinks and mauves unscrews the bolts of gender. When Agrado takes the stage, silicone breasts jutting out of her cleavage, we hear that operatic cri de coeur about rebuilding her engine, one part at a time, hips, lips, and ass, the Via Dolorosa you take on the way to being you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much for reading and putting this together. Thank you, Laura and Ted and Isaac, and best to Michelle. And thanks everybody for being here. Can we throw all the mics open and say hello and goodbye at the same time as we do?
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. That was amazing.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Great to have Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, everybody. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was incredible.
Beautiful
Thank
reading.
you.
I do.
I needed that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hot doggy.
Isaac,
Great.
Isaac,
Thank you. Thank you.
Laura, Ted, Chris, thank you. Beautiful, beautiful.
Beautiful reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks
Chris.
for coming. Hey,
Thank you.
Norma.
Hi. Hi,
Thank you,
Chris.
Isaac.
It was great reading. Really great. Thank you
Thank you. Thank
so
you.
much.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so good to see you. Awesome.
You too. Yeah.